Right now, there's kind of a post-mortem going around concerning Concord and figuring out how this became one of the biggest, if not biggest, flops in all of video game history right now, because this was supposed to be a big thing for Sony, and they released the game about a month ago, and then around 2 weeks after they released the game, they took it offline because no one was playing it. At its peak, it only had around a couple hundred active players, so really this game was a complete flop for them, no matter how you look at it. But when people were saying that this was probably the biggest video game flop in all of gaming history, they were figuring the budget for this game was around $200 million. But right now, according to these latest rumors, it's looking like that could have been much worse, because we got this article right here from Dexerto that's reporting on these rumors. And according to an alleged insider, Sony actually spent $400 million to produce this game. Now, you have to take this with a pinch of salt, because we don't know who this insider is who's reporting this information. Not to mention, there are some other things with this that kind of makes me question the legitimacy of it. But still, I want to talk about what's being reported right now. And I'll go over some of my questions and concerns a little bit later. According to Colin Moriarty, an industry veteran who claims to have talked with a developer at Firewalk, Concord cost a total of $400 million and was meant to be the future of PlayStation, with a level of impact similar to Star Wars. And what he means by that is this was supposed to be Sony's next big franchise for their platform, similar to how Microsoft has Master Chief in Halo, Nintendo has Mario. Sony was supposed to have Concord, but it's looking like that's not going to be the case because this game was a failure. Concord was taken offline after less than 2 weeks and has gone down as one of the biggest flops in gaming history. I already covered that. Colin Moriarty claims the game cost a total of $400 million to make, with $200 million of that amounting to development costs before PlayStation bought out Firewalk Studios, and another $200 million spent by Sony after. He claimed he had a long conversation with someone who worked on the game and was given a ton of information about its troubled development. He never said particularly who he was talking to, but he did say that he personally verified all the information in this guy's credentials, and he assured us that this person was actually an employee at Firewalk Studios. So a lot of this ultimately comes down to whether you trust what he's saying on this. He's usually pretty good about this type of thing. He doesn't just throw out rumors like this, but still, it's an anonymous source, so you can take it with a pinch of salt, especially since there are some questions I have about this. Concord cost about $400 million to make, Moriarty claimed. In the first quarter of 2023, Concord entered into alpha state. This was before Sony purchased the team. Even to get it into alpha, $200 million was spent on the game, according to his source. The game was in laughable shape when it was shown when the alpha was ready to go. He continued, it was in such horrible shape that Sony felt like they needed to spend that much money again, $200 million plus $200 million to get the game to viability. And this is one of the big questions I have about this, because if the game was in such bad shape, why did they feel that it was going to be a surefire hit for them? Because Sony thought like, well, this game looks terrible. Let's spend another couple $100 million in order to make this work. Because yeah, some people might think like, oh, it's the sunk cost fallacy. They already spent a couple $100 million on it, not to mention buying Firewalk Studios. So they didn't want to just eat the cost. So they were trying to make it work. And that could be a possibility, but usually in the business world, they're not going to be going into this much effort for a game if they think it's going to be a... And this is one of the big questions I have about this, because if the game was in such horrible condition where they thought this is terrible, we need to spend more money to do this, why would they do that? Why wouldn't they just cut their losses? And I know there's the whole sunk cost fallacy where they spend a bunch of money to acquire Firewalk Studios, and maybe they spent so much more money to try to develop the game. So they were like, well, we already sunk so much into this, we need to make it work. So then that's why they spent another couple $100 million in order to try to make it work. And that's a possibility, but I don't know why they would actually just release it when they did. If that was such a bad shape, then maybe they should have delayed it even longer in order to try to hammer out some of the details. It kind of touches on that a little bit, where he says the sentiment in the company was what they described as toxic positivity, where everyone was so fixated on this, or at least anyone at the upper levels was so fixated that this is going to be a surefire hit. We're going to make a ton of money with this, so let's spend more money on it because this is going to be the next big thing. Well, okay, maybe that could kind of account for it, but still, I'm not necessarily buying it. And also, if this was supposed to be one of their next big franchises, then I don't understand why they are willing to just cut it loose after only 2 weeks live. You would think if the game is not really well received after just 2 weeks after they spent this much money on the game, then they would have figured out some other way to try to make it work, whether do some patches for it, have some other downloads for it, maybe do a better marketing push, do something as opposed to like spending over $500 million on a game like this and just willing to cut it loose after just a couple weeks. To me, that doesn't really make much sense, and why I think there's a lot of problems with some of these claims that are being made about it. But let's continue. Concord was the future of PlayStation that they had such major ambition for. This game that was referred to as Star Wars-like project for Sony, that it could be repeatedly revisited over and over again. So kind of what I was saying about how this was supposed to be the next big franchise for Sony, but again, it really just didn't work out for them. It was something that was released, and when it was released, a few hundred people played it. Everyone else was just roasting it. And then when the game started failing, everyone was just talking about how much of failure it was. But this was supposed to be something big for Sony, and they weren't even willing to give it a shot after it was released. It's almost like once they released it and saw the reception was initially bad, they understood like, okay, this isn't going to work, so let's just cut it loose right now, because it does cost them money to maintain a live game like this. So it could be they didn't want to spend the money to actually keep the game going after it was released, but that kind of goes against the whole sunk cost fallacy mindset either, because to say these claims are true and they spent this much money on the game, you would have to say that they were just so fixated on the game succeeding that they're willing to spend as much money as they could in development. And then after the game was released, they're willing to just cut it loose right away because they saw it's not working. And like I was saying, that doesn't really make much sense. I would think that if they were so fixated on it and they had a culture of toxic positivity, then they would have been trying to do something to make the game work after it was launched. That's not the case right here. And that's why I'm kind of have my doubts that it was actually $400 million in total for the cost of the game, in addition to the money that they spent to acquire the studio. I think probably the initial estimates are closer to that, and that's talking about $200 million to develop it. But still, I mean, they spent a huge amount of money for this game, and no matter whether it's this $400 million figure or the $200 million figure, this game is still going down as one of the biggest, if not biggest, flops in video game history. But I can believe the toxic positivity culture at Sony for this game when they're developing it, because you see a lot of studios do this where they'll spend a ton of money on properties, because you don't spend this much money on something if you think it's going to be a failure or if you just want to try it out. You spend this much money when you think it's going to succeed, and clearly they just missed the mark on this one. And we've seen that with a lot of other games and even movies and TV shows lately, where the studio will spend a ton of money on something only for everyone just to be getting more enjoyment roasting it. So there are people at these companies that really do not have a finger on the pulse of the audience, and that's why you see these big flops. And that's kind of inexcusable in today's environment, because you can go on social media, you can see what people are saying about your properties and your projects in the lead up to the release of it. People are saying what they want. There's a lot of people that are interacting with those commentators and things like that. So you get an idea of what's popular and what's not. So the only reason a company would not be listening to these type of people in the audience is because they're listening to the wrong sort of people. And if you're going to see more flops like this go on, then maybe you'll start seeing more companies be like, oh, maybe we should stop listening to this group of the audience and start listening to this group, because clearly the people we've been listening to isn't actually buying our product, which is usually the modern audience. And we should start going back to listening to our old school fans, because whenever we do, then that's when we start seeing success. So I don't know, maybe this is going to be a wake up call for Sony, or maybe they're going to continue working with their heads in the sand. You tell me what you think about all this in the comment section below. And if you haven't already, make sure you click that subscribe button if you want to stay up to date with the latest entertainment news. And if you don't mind, click that like button and share this video out there with your friends, because it really helps out with the channel. Thank you.